This is week 6 of the Story of Israel online course, and this session is part of 2 of the emergence of kingship in Israel, the beginning of kingship in Israel. This session deals with Samuel and Saul. The outline of 1 Samuel to 1 Kings chapter 2 is the following. First, 1 Samuel chapters 1 through 3, the early life and the call of Samuel the prophet. 1 Samuel chapters 4 through 7, the ark narrative, or some call it the travelings of the ark. 1 Samuel chapters 8 through 15, the rise and the decline of Saul. 1 Samuel 16 through 2 Samuel 7, the story of David's rise. 2 Samuel 9 through 1 Kings 2, the throne succession narrative, or who will ascend to the throne of David after he is gone. The decision to have a king in Israel was not made overnight, but was a development that took place over a lengthy period of time. There are several factors which led to the emergence of kingship in Israel. First and foremost is the urgency of the Philistine threat. 1 Samuel 4 through 6 and chapters 13 and 14. Along with the rise of Philistine power and concomitant with it was the Philistine monopoly on iron weapons and tools. 1 Samuel 14, verse 19 and following. The next factor is that the Israelites, unlike the Philistines, had no centralized government, and so they relied on the tribal militias to decide, or not to, whether to go to war. 1 Samuel 8, 19 and 20. Likewise, there was no standing army in Israel, but rather just the militia for each tribe. 1 Samuel 8, 19 and 20. Israel's attitude towards the monarchy was very ambivalent. Even in the book of Judges, we see this ambivalence towards monarchy. First, Gideon the judge is offered the kingship in Judges 8:22, but he turns it down and says, "I will not be king, my son will not be king, but God will be king over you." In chapter 9 of Judges, his son Abimelech does receive the kingship of the city of Shechem and rules there a brief period of time until he's assassinated. These are considered very bad things in the first part of the book of Judges, that it's a sign of departure from God. Yet in the appendices to the book of Judges, the final chapters, Israel is in chaos, in civil war, and loss of tribal territory because there is no king in the land. Saul, first, when people demand for a king in Israel, it is considered a sign of the rejection of God. 1 Samuel 8:4 and 10:17. Samuel tells them to go and and anoint a king. First, he anoints King Saul in chapter 8, or chapter 9 rather. And in those chapters, chapters 9 and 10, Saul's coming to the kingship is considered a good thing. David's faithfulness to God and God's covenant with him in 2 Samuel 7 is a very, very positive thing. Deuteronomy chapter 17, the law of the king, says that they may indeed have a king if they want a king. In later Old Testament books, this ambivalence continues. In Chronicles, kingship through David is a very positive thing. But in the books of Ezra and Nehemiah, there is no mention whatsoever of Davidic kingship or its ideology. So there's a lot of ambivalence towards kingship. What begins as rejection of God and his kingship and sovereignty over them ends with God determining that when he blesses his people, it will be through a descendant of David. And so this ambivalence towards human kingship continues throughout the Old Testament. Let's talk about the rise and decline of Saul in his kingship in 1 Samuel 9 through 15. First, in chapter 9, a small family in the smallest tribe, Benjamin, the father's name is Kish, is missing some donkeys, and so sends his son Saul and his servant to go looking for them. In the meantime, God tells Samuel to meet them and gives him the message that he is to give to Saul, that God will anoint him king. Saul and the servant determined to go and ask the whereabouts of the donkeys through a seer, that is Samuel. When he gets to Samuel's house, Samuel does eventually anoint him for kingship and tells him to go back, that the donkeys have been found, and so Saul does this. On the way back, Saul prophesies in the presence of ecstatic prophets, a very ambiguous thing, because it's sort of absurd that Saul, given his personality and calling, would be counted among the prophets, but also in a sense legitimating his kingship. Subsequently, Saul is anointed not only by Samuel, that had happened previously, but by all of Israel. And he is head and shoulders taller than everyone else. And yet, he is also very timid and hides among the baggage. Immediately after that, Saul engages in warfare with the Ammonite kingdom, and the Ammonites are defeated. God becomes angry with those who had demanded a king, and yet forgives them for that, but tells them this is what kind of person you will have. A king over you will be not necessarily a good thing at all. Immediately following this chapter, chapters 12 and following, Saul immediately begins his decline and seemingly can do no good whatsoever. A sort of a downward spiral with several bad decisions on Saul's part. He sacrifices when he shouldn't. He spares a foreign king whom he should not spare, and he makes bad decisions regarding oaths that he makes his warriors take, which have consequences on his son Jonathan. First, in chapters 13 and 14, he waits to offer sacrifice for a week, waiting for Samuel to arrive. And yet Samuel is delayed. Eventually Saul offers the sacrifice himself. Of course, Samuel shows up immediately and says it's a very poor decision on his part. And so Samuel says, because you've done this, your dynasty will not continue. Finally, there is victory over the Philistines, but in the course of that fighting, Saul makes his men give a solemn oath not to eat or drink anything until they return victoriously from the Philistine battle. Jonathan was not there, and so ate a little bit of honey, came back, the deed is known, and Saul sets about to put his son to death because he broke the oath. If not for the intervention of his own army, Saul would have killed his own son. Finally, there's war with the Amalekites in chapter 15 of 1 Samuel. Saul and the armies of Israel go, they destroy the Amalekites, a desert-dwelling nomadic group in the south, in the desert. But they broke the law of the devotion to destruction, or the ban, that's given in Deuteronomy chapter 20. He spared their king Agag, and he also took the best of the flocks and herds back with him. As a result, Samuel tells him, when he sees that he's spared King Agag and has spared the flocks and herds, that he can no longer be king. Saul treated the law of the devotion to destruction, the harem, according to his own desires and his own wants, not according to the Torah. Samuel took a sword, killed King Agag himself, and told Saul, obedience is better than sacrifice. After that episode with Saul, he never saw him again till the day of his death.